I found out my boyfriend was cheating on me because he was wearing the engagement ring I spent 3 months saving for while lying in my brother's bed. The worst part? They both looked annoyed that I had interrupted them. For one horrible second, nobody moved. The music downstairs still drifted through the house from my mother's birthday party. Soft jazz and clinking wine glasses floating up the staircase like the universe hadn't just cracked open beneath my feet. My hand tightened around the little velvet box in my pocket, so hard the edges dug into my palm. Noah sat up first, shirt half unbuttoned, dark hair messy like someone had been running their fingers through it. Mason leaned against the headboard beside him, looking completely comfortable in my childhood bedroom, like betraying me was just another Thursday night activity. I stared at them, unable to breathe properly. Adrian. Noah started carefully, like he was approaching a wounded animal. This isn't, don't, I said immediately, my voice coming out thinner than I wanted. Please don't insult me with the world's dumbest sentence right now. Mason rolled his eyes before Noah could speak again. Actually rolled his eyes. You were going to find out eventually, he muttered. Something inside my chest twisted so violently it made me dizzy. Find out. I laughed once, sharp and ugly. You mean find out my boyfriend's been sleeping with my brother? Downstairs, someone burst into laughter. Probably my aunt after her third glass of Chardonnay. The normalcy of it made me feel sick. Noah finally stood, pulling his shirt straight. Adrian, listen to me. No, you listen to me. My throat burned. I was downstairs about to propose to you. Silence. Real silence this time. Even Mason looked surprised for half a second before his expression flattened again. I pulled the velvet box out of my pocket and tossed it onto the bed between them. Noah stared at it like it might explode. Mason looked down at the ring, then back at me, and actually had the nerve to sigh. Jesus, Adrian. That hurt more than catching them together. Not the cheating, not the lying. The disappointment in his voice, like I had become. Inconvenient. Like loving someone too deeply was embarrassing. Noah rubbed a hand over his face. I didn't know you were doing that tonight. Clearly. My laugh cracked this time. How long? Neither answered immediately, which was answer enough. My stomach dropped somewhere near my shoes. How long? I repeated louder. Noah looked away first. Mason answered instead because apparently destroying me wasn't complete without audience participation. About 8 months. 8 months. 8 months of family dinners. 8 months of Noah kissing me goodbye while texting my brother behind my back. 8 months of me defending both of them whenever people joked they acted weirdly close. I suddenly remembered Thanksgiving. The matching inside jokes. The whispers. The way Mason had smirked when Noah helped him loosen his tie after dinner. My entire body went cold. Wow, I whispered. Wow. Noah stepped toward me carefully. It wasn't supposed to happen. That's usually how cheating works. You've been distant for months, Mason cut in. You're always working, always anxious, always making everything feel so intense. I stared at him in disbelief. You're blaming me? Mason crossed his arms. I'm saying Noah was unhappy. That sentence landed harder than anything else that night because Mason said it so casually. Like my heartbreak was a scheduling conflict. Like I should apologize for making it difficult to betray me properly. Downstairs, my mother called my name cheerfully from the kitchen. Adrian? Honey, Noah said you were upstairs. My chest tightened so fast I thought I might actually pass out. Noah looked panicked now. Mason just looked irritated. And suddenly I understood something awful. They already knew I'd stay quiet. They thought I'd protect the family. Protect the party. Protect them. Mason glanced toward the door and muttered the sentence that finally shattered whatever was left of me. You were always too sensitive anyway. I made it exactly 11 minutes before my mother told me I was embarrassing everyone. The second I walked back downstairs, every conversation in the dining room seemed to pause for half a heartbeat before awkwardly restarting. Again, the air smelled like rosemary chicken, expensive candles, and humiliation. I could practically feel people avoiding eye contact with me. My mother stood near the kitchen island with a wine glass in her hand, pearls gleaming against her throat. She looked beautiful in the kind of polished way that made emotions seem tacky. Where is Noah? She asked immediately, smiling too brightly. I stared at her for a second too long. Upstairs with Mason. Something flickered across her face. Not surprise. Recognition. My stomach twisted again. Adrian, she said carefully, stepping closer. Maybe keep your voice down. I laughed softly because that was somehow worse than denial. You knew? It is complicated. That is not a no. Around us, silverware clinked against plates while relatives pretended not to listen. My aunt suddenly became fascinated by her salad. My cousin nearly inhaled his wine, trying not to stare. My mother lowered her voice. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I blinked at her slowly. Harder for who? She exhaled like she was exhausted by me specifically. Noah and Mason did not mean for this to happen. Right, I whispered. They accidentally fell into each other for 8 months. Adrian. Her tone sharpened slightly. You have always been emotional. Sensitive people take things too personally. That sentence hit me like ice water because Mason had said almost the exact same thing upstairs. Suddenly I understood where he learned it. I looked around the room again, at the expensive table settings and family photos lining the walls, and realized something horrible. I was the only person here grieving. Everyone else was managing optics. My father would not even look directly at me. Noah finally appeared at the staircase then, freshly composed in a pale blue dress shirt that I bought him last Christmas. Mason followed behind him looking bored. Nobody said anything. Nobody screamed. Nobody demanded answers. My family simply adjusted around betrayal, like moving furniture slightly to the left. I grabbed my coat from the chair before anyone could stop me. Adrian, do not leave like this, my mother snapped quietly. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I did not recognize this woman anymore. You are worried about the neighbors hearing me cry? I said softly. Not about me. Then I walked out. Rain had started sometime during dinner. Cold droplets tapped against my face as I crossed the driveway too fast, breathing hard like I had outrun something terrible, even though it was still clawing through my chest. By the time I reached downtown, my hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped my phone trying to silence Noah's fourth call. I ducked into the first bar I saw because it was warm and crowded and loud enough to drown out my thoughts. Amber lights glowed against dark wood walls while an old Fleetwood Mac song drifted through the speakers. People laughed around me like heartbreak was not currently chewing through my ribcage. I slid onto a stool near the back corner and ordered whiskey, even though I hated whiskey. The bartender gave me one look and poured a double without asking questions. Smart man. I was halfway through the glass when a deep voice beside me said, that expression usually means someone either lost a fortune or discovered a terrible family secret. I turned slowly. The man sitting beside me looked expensive in a dangerous kind of way. Dark charcoal suit, silver watch, black hair brushed neatly away from a sharp, unreadable face. He was probably in his early 30s, composed in the way powerful people usually were, like nothing in life surprised them anymore. But his eyes were fixed entirely on me. Calm, focused, interested. I swallowed hard for no reason I could explain. What if it is both? I asked quietly. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly. Then you need something stronger than whiskey. He gestured toward the untouched drink in front of him before extending his hand toward me like we were beginning something important instead of ruining my life further. Lucian Hart. Most people look away when they realize you are falling apart in public. Lucian Hart looked closer. The bartender refreshed my drink quietly before disappearing to the other end of the counter like he already knew better than to interrupt whatever strange gravity had settled between us. I stared down at the amber liquid in my glass while rain streaked across the windows behind us in blurred silver lines. You always approach miserable strangers in bars. I asked finally. Lucian loosened one cuff with calm, precise fingers. Only the interesting ones. I snorted softly despite myself. That sounds rehearsed. It probably does. His voice was low and smooth, the kind that made people instinctively listen. But you still smiled. I hated that he was right. Barely. Tiny. But still. Lucian watched me for another second before glancing toward the untouched velvet box sitting beside my elbow. I had not even realized I set it on the counter. Engagement ring? He asked carefully. Something sharp twisted beneath my ribs again. Was supposed to be. His gaze flicked back to my face. He said no. I laughed under my breath. He said yes to my brother instead. For the first time since sitting down, Lucian's expression changed. Not pity. Something colder. Controlled. Dangerous in a very quiet way. That is unfortunate, he said softly. For them. I frowned slightly. You do not even know me. No, he agreed. But I know betrayal when I see it. The bartender suddenly returned carrying another whiskey I definitely did not order. Courtesy of the gentleman at the end of the bar, he muttered awkwardly before nodding toward a blond man in a tight navy polo staring openly at me from 3 stools away. I immediately looked down, exhausted already. The blonde lifted his glass slightly with a grin that somehow felt sticky from across the room. Before I could react, Lucian calmly slid the drink away from me. No thank you, he said without even looking in the man's direction. The blonde laughed. I was just being friendly. Lucien finally turned his head. It was subtle, just a glance. But the energy in the room shifted anyway. And I am asking you not to. The blonde muttered something under his breath before turning back around. My pulse skipped strangely. That was unnecessary, I said quietly. Probably, Lucien agreed. But you looked like you were 2 seconds away from letting a stranger ruin your night, even further out of pure emotional exhaustion. I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again because unfortunately he was correct. He reached for his own glass, then paused as his phone buzzed once against the counter. A single message flashed briefly across the screen before he turned it face down. Arrival confirmed. Security in position. I blinked. Security? Lucien noticed the direction of my eyes and smiled faintly. Occupational hazard. What exactly do you do? I own several hotels. He said it casually, but something about him felt much larger than that. Expensive watch. Tailored suit. The sleek black car waiting outside the bar visible through the rain with a driver still inside. Nothing about Lucien Hart felt ordinary. He studied me quietly for another moment before asking, "Are they still together?" I laughed bitterly. My family is probably finishing dessert together right now. And tomorrow? Tomorrow they will expect me to smile through brunch and pretend none of this happened. Lucien leaned back slightly, fingers tapping once against his glass. Then do not give them what they expect. I frowned. Meaning? His eyes settled on me fully then, dark and steady enough to make my heartbeat stumble for reasons I absolutely did not want to examine. Bring someone they cannot ignore. The rain outside intensified, soft thunder rolling through the city. What are you talking about? I asked carefully. Lucien's mouth curved just slightly. Not warm. Not mocking either. Something in between. You need a boyfriend by Saturday. I stared at him. I just lost one. Exactly. His voice softened almost imperceptibly. So let me become the man they regret underestimating you with. For a second, I genuinely forgot how to breathe. Then Lucien reached into the inside pocket of his coat and slid a black business card across the counter toward me. Minimalist. Elegant. Just his name embossed in silver lettering beside a single phone number. Lucien Hart. Hart International Holdings. My stomach dropped slightly when I recognized the company name immediately. Luxury hotels. Real estate. Charity galas splashed across magazines my mother obsessively read. Wealthy enough to make people nervous. I looked back up at him. Slowly. Why would you do this for me? Lucien held my gaze for one long, unreadable second before saying quietly, because sometimes the cruelest thing you can do to people who broke your heart is show them how easily someone else could love you better. By Friday morning, my family had already rewritten the story to make me look unstable. I found that out because my Aunt Cheryl called at 8:30 in the morning pretending she wanted to check on me, then spent 20 minutes gently suggesting that maybe I had overreacted. Apparently Noah and Mason had developed feelings naturally, which was a fascinating way to describe betraying someone for nearly a year. By noon, my cousin texted asking if I was still coming to Mason's engagement brunch on Saturday, because avoiding it would only make things more awkward. As if I was somehow responsible for the discomfort of the people who destroyed me. I spent most of the afternoon sitting on my apartment floor staring at my phone while rain tapped softly against the windows. Noah had sent 14 messages. Half apologies. Half excuses. The latest one simply read, "I never wanted to hurt you." I almost threw my phone across the room. Instead, I opened Lucien's business card again. The silver lettering caught the gray light from the window. For some reason, just looking at his name steadied something inside me. I still had not decided whether agreeing to his insane proposal was brave or deeply concerning. Probably both. My phone buzzed again before I could think further. Unknown number. Where's something black tomorrow? Formal. Another message followed immediately after. And Adrian, do not let them make you feel small before I arrive. Heat rushed unexpectedly into my chest. I stared at the screen longer than necessary before typing back. Is this how you normally recruit fake boyfriends? 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Only the pretty, traumatized ones. I actually laughed. A real laugh this time. Quiet, surprised, escaping before I could stop it. Saturday arrived too quickly. By 6:30 that evening, I was standing outside the private rooftop restaurant Mason rented downtown, trying not to throw up from anxiety. Golden lights glowed behind massive glass windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, while expensive cars lined the valet entrance below. Everyone in my family loved places like this. Restaurants where the menus did not list prices and nobody ever raised their voice above polite disappointment. I checked my phone again. No messages from Lucien. Panic slowly crawled up my throat. Of course. Of course this was insane. He probably changed his mind after sobering up and realizing pretending to date a stranger with family trauma was not a good investment of his Saturday night. I should leave. I turned toward the elevator just as someone behind me said softly, "You are early." My heartbeat completely betrayed me. Lucien stood a few feet away wearing a perfectly tailored black coat over a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Rain-dark hair brushed neatly away from his forehead, while city lights reflected faintly in his eyes. He looked calm, elegant, untouchable, and somehow entirely focused on me. His gaze moved slowly over my black button-down and fitted coat before he nodded once. "Good," he murmured. "You listened." My mouth suddenly forgot how words worked. Lucien stepped closer, adjusting one silver cufflink absent-mindedly. "You look nervous." I am about to walk into a room full of people who think I am the family embarrassment. Something cold flickered briefly across his expression. "Then let us disappoint them together." Before I could respond, the rooftop doors opened. My cousin Emma stepped outside holding a champagne glass and immediately froze when she saw Lucien beside me. Her eyes widened so dramatically it almost would have been funny under different circumstances. "Adrian," she breathed. "Who is this?" Lucien answered before I could. Smooth. Effortless. Lucien Hart. Recognition hit her face instantly. People in Chicago knew that name. Wealth. Hotels. Charity boards. The kind of man magazines photographed leaving black cars beside actresses and politicians. Emma nearly choked on her champagne. "Wait. The Lucien Hart." Lucien smiled politely without confirming or denying anything. Then, before my rapidly collapsing nervous system could recover, he reached up and adjusted the collar of my coat with gentle precision. His fingers brushed briefly against my throat, warm and steady. "You missed a button," he said softly, like we had known each other forever. The intimacy of it hit harder than it should have. Emma looked between us with open shock. "Oh my God," she whispered. "You are dating." Lucien's hand settled lightly against the small of my back then, subtle enough to remain polite and possessive enough to make my pulse stumble. "Is that going to be a problem?" he asked calmly. Inside the restaurant, through the glowing glass walls, I saw Noah turn toward the entrance and go completely still. The silence inside the restaurant lasted exactly 3 seconds before the gossip started moving like wildfire. You could practically see it traveling from table to table. Phones lowered. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence as Lucien guided me through the rooftop dining room with one calm hand still resting against my back. Every nerve in my body felt hyper-aware of that touch. Warm, steady, possessive enough to make people stare. Noah looked like someone had punched the air from his lungs. Mason recovered faster, of course. He always did. My brother straightened beside the champagne tower near the center of the room and gave me a slow once-over before his attention snapped sharply toward Lucien. "Adrian," he said carefully, "you brought someone." "Observant as always," I replied. Lucien's fingers flexed once lightly against my waist like he was silently telling me not to panic. The gesture should not have comforted me as much as it did. Noah stepped forward then, visibly struggling to keep his expression composed. "Can we talk privately?" "No," Lucien answered before I could. Calm, polite, absolute. Noah blinked. "I was talking to Adrian." Lucien finally looked at him directly. "And Adrian does not look interested." The entire table went silent. My Aunt Cheryl nearly dropped her fork. Noah's jaw tightened slightly. "I think this is family business." "Interesting," Lucien murmured. "Because cheating with his brother sounds less like family business and more like a personality disorder." I almost choked trying not to laugh. Mason's expression darkened instantly. "Who exactly are you?" Lucien reached for the champagne flute a waiter offered him without breaking eye contact. "Someone with significantly better manners than either of you." Dear God, the chemistry of watching someone defend me this elegantly should have been illegal. My mother appeared beside us, then wearing the brittle smile she used whenever rich people entered a room. "Mr. Hart," she said quickly. "What a surprise." I frowned slightly. "You know him?" Her expression flickered for half a second. Too late. Lucien noticed too. "Of course he did. We have met before," he said smoothly. "At the Fairmont Restoration fundraiser last winter." My mother immediately brightened. "Of course. Your family foundation donated nearly $2 million. My stomach dropped slightly. $2 million. Lucien never looked away from me as he lifted his champagne glass. I believe Adrian mentioned this evening was important to the family. There was something strange beneath his tone now. Something deliberate. Noah looked increasingly pale standing across from us, while Mason crossed his arms defensively. Adrian, Noah said quietly, can we please not do this tonight? Lucien's hand slid lower against my back. Protective. Controlled. That is interesting coming from the man who ruined tonight in the first place. My pulse jumped embarrassingly hard. Nobody had defended me like this all week. Nobody. Not my parents. Not my cousins. Not even myself. Then one of the older investors near the back table suddenly laughed under his breath. Hart, he said loudly enough for half the room to hear. Did not realize your father finally let you out in public after the merger scandal. Something shifted instantly. The atmosphere tightened around us like invisible wire. Lucien's expression remained perfectly calm, but the waiter nearest him straightened nervously. Even my father looked uncomfortable now. I frowned slightly. What merger scandal? Nobody answered immediately. The investor took another sip of wine before smirking faintly. You mean Adrian does not know? Lucien's jaw tightened almost invisibly. That is enough, Richard. But the man only leaned back further in his chair. Your boyfriend deserves honesty, does he not? My chest suddenly felt cold. Lucien. For the first time since meeting him, Lucien looked uncertain. Tiny. Brief. Gone almost immediately. But I saw it. Adrian, he said carefully. We should discuss this privately. Discuss what? The investor laughed again. Your fake boyfriend happens to be the heir to the largest luxury hotel empire in the Midwest. And according to every business magazine in America, he is about 6 months away from replacing his father entirely. Murmurs exploded quietly across the room. I stared at Lucien in disbelief. You told me you owned hotels. I do. You did not mention you were basically hotel royalty. That term feels excessive. Are you serious right now? Heat flooded my face. Embarrassment. Anger. Something sharper beneath both. Did everybody know except me? Lucien's gaze softened slightly. I was going to tell you. When... My voice cracked louder than I wanted. After I humiliated myself in front of my family pretending this was real. His expression changed instantly at that. Hurt flickered across his face so quickly I almost missed it. I never asked you to humiliate yourself. But suddenly the hand against my back felt different. Not grounding. Not safe. Strategic. My stomach twisted violently. God. I had done it again. Trusted the wrong person because he looked at me kindly. I left the restaurant before anyone could see how badly my hands were shaking. The elevator ride down from the rooftop felt endless and suffocating, the polished gold walls reflecting back a version of myself I barely recognized anymore. Humiliated son. Betrayed boyfriend. Idiot pretending to belong beside a man whose family probably owned half the city skyline. By the time the elevator doors opened into the lobby, rain was pouring hard enough to blur the windows into silver streaks. I pushed through the revolving doors without thinking. Cold rain immediately soaked through my coat and shirt, but honestly it felt deserved at this point. Adrian. Lucien's voice followed me across the sidewalk. Calm. Controlled. Still. Somehow making my chest ache. I kept walking. Do not. He caught up beside me near the curb where black cars lined the street under glowing hotel lights. You are angry. I understand that. You understand? I laughed bitterly, rain dripping down my face. Apparently everyone in Chicago knows who you are except me. Lucien stood there quietly while thunder rolled somewhere over the lake. His dark coat was already damp at the shoulders, rain catching against his lashes, but he still looked painfully composed. I did not lie to hurt you, he said softly. No, you just conveniently forgot to mention you are basically billionaire royalty. That is not how I see myself. That must be nice. The words came out sharper than I intended. Lucien flinched almost invisibly. Tiny, but real. I turned away immediately because seeing that hurt worse than staying angry. A black SUV pulled smoothly toward the curb beside us then. The driver stepped out holding an umbrella, but Lucien shook his head once without looking away from me. Go home, Daniel. The driver hesitated. Sir, your father specifically requested. I said go home. The man nodded immediately before returning to the vehicle. Seconds later, the SUV disappeared into traffic, leaving Lucien standing in the rain beside me with no umbrella and no security team. Just him. Something about that unsettled me more than the expensive suit or the hotel empire. Your father controls your schedule? I asked quietly. Lucien exhaled softly through his nose. My father controls many things. Rainwater traced slowly down the side of his face while city lights shimmered across the wet pavement around us. For the first time since meeting him, he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally tired. People think money makes you powerful, he murmured. Mostly it just makes your life belong to other people. I stared at him silently. Lucien glanced toward the glowing hotel behind us before speaking again. My father arranged interviews with women before I turned 25 because he wanted photographs for investors. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Lucien, he laughed quietly without humor. I attended my first board meeting at 14 years old. My father introduced me by saying, "This is the son who will eventually become useful." Something painful shifted beneath his calm expression, then disappeared almost immediately. But I saw it. Loneliness recognized loneliness frighteningly fast. Rain continued soaking through my clothes while traffic hissed softly through the streets around us. Why me? I asked finally. Out of everyone in Chicago, why did you walk into that bar and choose me? Lucien looked at me for a very long second. Honest. Uncomfortably honest. Because you looked heartbroken, he said quietly. And because I know what it feels like when everyone around you treats your pain like an inconvenience. The anger inside me loosened slightly in places I did not want it to. I looked down at my wet sleeves instead. You still should have told me who you really were. You are right. No defensiveness. No excuses. Just that. I am not very good at being a normal person around people. He stopped himself abruptly. My pulse stumbled. Around people you what? Lucien's jaw tightened slightly like he regretted getting that close to honesty. Care about. The word landed softly between us anyway. Care about. Not fake. Not strategic. Real enough to sound dangerous. A cold gust of wind swept through the street, and I shivered hard before I could stop myself. Lucien noticed immediately. Of course he did. He stepped closer without touching me at first, then carefully shrugged off his coat and draped it over my shoulders despite the rain already soaking through both of us. The inside lining still carried traces of cedarwood and expensive cologne. Warm, clean, safe. You are freezing, he murmured. Lucien, you do not have to, I know. His hand brushed lightly against the edge of the coat near my collarbone, fingers lingering for half a second too long. Not possessive this time. Gentle. That is the problem, Adrian. My breath caught slightly. Somewhere behind us, another black car slowly rolled toward the curb. Different driver. Different vehicle. Waiting patiently. Lucien glanced at it once before looking back at me with an expression so quietly exhausted it made my chest ache. Again. Come home with me, he said softly. Not because I expect anything. Not because this arrangement requires it. Just because I do not think you should be alone tonight. By Monday morning, the internet had already decided I was a gold digger. I found that out because my phone would not stop vibrating at 6:15 in the morning. At first I thought it was Noah again. Then I saw 37 notifications stacked across my screen. Instagram, text messages, missed calls from cousins who ignored me all week and suddenly cared now that public humiliation was trending online. My stomach tightened as I opened the first message from Emma. Emma, Adrian, please tell me this is fake. Attached beneath it was a blurry screenshot from a celebrity gossip account. The headline nearly made me sick. Small-town designer rebounds fast with billionaire hotelier. Sources claim relationship is a publicity deal. Underneath the article were photos of me leaving the rooftop restaurant with Lucien. Another photo of him touching my collar. Another of us standing in the rain outside the hotel. Then came the worst part. Screenshots. Text messages. Mine. Except not entirely mine. The messages had clearly been edited together from different conversations. I stared at the screen in horror. I can make him jealous. I need someone convincing. He is rich enough to destroy them. Another line followed beneath it. Maybe I can finally get something out of all this pain. My blood went cold. Those messages were from separate conversations with completely different people. Rearranged. Manipulated. Designed perfectly to make me look calculating and pathetic. Comments flooded beneath the post faster than I could process them. So he used Lucien Hart for revenge? Poor guy probably thought it was real. Another social climber trying to marry rich. Honestly, Lucien deserves better. I stopped reading after that because my chest physically hurt. My phone rang suddenly. Noah. I rejected the call instantly. It rang again. Then Mason texted. Mason, you should probably stop pretending before this gets worse. I actually laughed out loud at that. Sharp. Hello. My humiliation had somehow become a family group project again. Another notification appeared before I could spiral further. Lucian Hart, I am coming over. 20 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up outside my apartment building. Rain drizzled softly against the windows while Chicago disappeared beneath gray morning fog. I barely had time to unlock the door before Lucian stepped inside wearing a dark wool coat and an expression so controlled it scared me slightly. Adrian. His eyes moved quickly across my face. Assessing. Concerned. Have you eaten? That is your first question? My voice cracked embarrassingly. Lucian removed his gloves slowly. If you have not eaten, your anxiety will worsen. Something about the gentleness of that nearly broke me. I held my phone out toward him instead. Did you see it? His jaw tightened faintly after reading the headline. Yes. People think I used you. Silence. Tiny. Brief. But devastating. My heartbeat stumbled immediately. Lucian looked down at the edited screenshots again without speaking. 1 second. 2. 3. Fear crawled violently up my throat. Oh God. He believed it. Of course he did. Why would he not? I looked ridiculous. Poor I hated how shaky my voice sounded. You do not owe me damage control because my ex-boyfriend decided to turn me into a public joke. Lucian stared at me for one long second. Then another. The silence became unbearable. My throat tightened painfully. There it was. Abandonment. I knew this feeling. The exact moment someone decides loving you is more trouble than it is worth. Finally, Lucian walked back toward me slowly. Deliberately. Adrian. He said softly, look at me. I forced myself to. His expression had changed completely now. Not cold. Not distant. Furious. But not at me. I am silent, he said carefully. Because I am deciding how much damage I am willing to do to the people who thought humiliating you publicly was acceptable. My breath caught hard. Lucian stepped closer until only inches remained between us. And because if I speak while angry, he murmured quietly, I might say something frighteningly honest about how little I care what the internet thinks compared to whether you are hurting right now. 3 days later, my family hosted a press brunch to clear up misunderstandings. Because apparently public betrayal now came with catering and floral arrangements. The event was held inside one of the Hart Regency hotels downtown, which felt ironic enough to make me nauseous. Crystal chandeliers glowed above white linen tables while local reporters and social media bloggers drifted through the ballroom pretending this was not just wealthy people weaponizing gossip in designer clothing. I should not have come. Every instinct in my body told me that the second I stepped inside the ballroom, where my mother stood smiling beside Mason and Noah like they were the victims in all this somehow. Conversations immediately hushed around me. I caught whispers almost instantly. That is him. The fake boyfriend thing. I heard he planned the entire relationship. My stomach twisted violently, but I kept walking anyway because humiliation apparently had become my cardio routine this month. Noah approached first looking exhausted and strangely desperate. Adrian, he said quietly, please just let us fix this before it gets worse. I stared at him in disbelief. You leaked fake messages about me. I did not. Mason appeared beside him immediately. Nobody leaked anything. Maybe people are just seeing who you really are. There it was again. That same coldness. That same effortless cruelty wrapped in calm voices and expensive suits. Before I could respond, my mother stepped forward holding a champagne glass like she was about to announce a charity raffle instead of publicly dismantling her own son. Adrian, she said softly, people are concerned that you manipulated this situation for attention. Laughter rippled quietly somewhere near the back tables. My face burned hot with humiliation. You cannot actually believe that. Then explain the messages, Mason snapped. Explain why a billionaire suddenly starts dating you 2 days after getting cheated on. Cameras shifted toward me. Phones lifted slightly. Waiting. Watching. I suddenly understood the real purpose of this brunch. They wanted me cornered publicly enough to surrender quietly. Admit the relationship was fake. Take the blame. Make everything easier for them. My throat tightened painfully. I never used anyone, I said quietly. Mason scoffed. Please. You think people cannot tell when someone is desperate? That one landed. Hard. The ballroom fell completely silent. I felt it immediately. That awful pressure behind my eyes right before humiliation becomes tears. God. Not here. Not in front of them. Noah looked uncomfortable for exactly half a second before lowering his gaze instead of defending me. Of course he did. Then suddenly the ballroom doors opened behind me. Every conversation stopped instantly. Lucian walked inside wearing a black tailored coat over a charcoal suit, silver cufflinks catching the chandelier light with every calm step forward. Two security staff followed several feet behind him before stopping near the entrance. The atmosphere in the room changed immediately. Wolf had gravity, Power had silence, and Lucy and Hart carried both like second nature. My mother's face went pale. Mason straightened defensively. Noah looked suddenly nervous in a way I had never seen before. Lucian's eyes found mine immediately across the ballroom. Steady, focused, gentle in a way that nearly broke me all over again. Then he looked at Mason. You edited the messages poorly, he said calmly. Complete silence. Mason blinked. What? Lucian reached into his coat pocket and removed a thin black folder before handing it to one of the reporters nearest the front. My security team recovered the original metadata from Adrian's phone backups yesterday evening. Murmurs spread instantly across the ballroom. The reporter flipped through the documents with widening eyes. These screenshots were manipulated, she breathed. Lucian nodded once. Timestamps altered. Conversations rearranged. Device signatures traced directly to Noah Bennett's laptop and Mason Vale's personal tablet. My breath caught painfully hard. Noah went white. Lucian, he started quickly. That is not what happened. Careful, Lucian interrupted softly. Lying publicly tends to age badly on the internet. The ballroom exploded into whispers. Phones lifted everywhere now. Cameras flashed. My mother looked horrified. Mason stepped forward angrily. You cannot just storm in here and threaten us because your little revenge romance got embarrassing. Lucian turned toward him slowly then. Calm, controlled, terrifyingly composed. No, he said quietly. What embarrasses me is watching grown adults destroy someone kind simply because hurting him became convenient. Silence crashed through the room again. Then Lucian crossed the remaining distance between us and stopped directly beside me, close enough that warmth radiated through the sleeve of his coat. Was this arrangement fake in the beginning? He asked suddenly, loud enough for the room to hear. My pulse stumbled. Lucian answered his own question before I could panic. Yes. Gasps fluttered softly around the ballroom. Mason smirked immediately, but Lucian continued calmly, eyes never leaving mine. What changed, he said quietly, was Adrian. The entire room froze. My chest physically hurt. Lucian's voice softened slightly then, something painfully honest slipping through his perfect composure. I was supposed to help him survive humiliation. Instead, somewhere along the way, he became the first person in years who made me feel human outside of my family's name. My breath caught completely. Cameras flashed wildly around us now, but Lucian never looked away from me. So for the sake of absolute clarity, he said softly, I am not standing beside Adrian today because I pity him. I am standing here because given every opportunity to walk away, I realized I do not want to. Then, in front of my entire family, Lucian reached for my trembling hand and held it openly. The ballroom stayed silent long after Lucian took my hand. Not awkward silence either. Shocked silence. The kind that settles over a room when people realize the story they built in their heads is collapsing in real time. Camera flashes continued bursting around us while reporters whispered frantically to each other near the front tables. Somewhere behind me, my mother sat down slowly like her knees suddenly stopped working. Mason looked furious enough to crack marble with his expression alone. Noah just looked devastated. Strangely, that no longer hurt me the way I thought it would. Maybe heartbreak eventually burns itself empty. Maybe being chosen honestly by someone else leaves less room for old ghosts. Lucian's thumb brushed once softly against the back of my hand, grounding me immediately. Adrian, Noah said quietly from across the ballroom, please. I looked at him for the first time in what felt like hours. His tie was crooked now, his eyes exhausted, familiar in all the wrong ways. You cannot seriously believe this is real, he whispered. The old version of me would have folded right there. Apologized, softened, tried to make everyone comfortable again even while bleeding out emotionally. But Lucian's hand remained steady in mine, warm and certain, and suddenly I realized how tired I was of begging people to love me gently. I think, I said carefully, the real question is why it bothers you if it is. Noah opened his mouth, then closed it again. No answer came, because there was none. Mason laughed sharply under his breath. You are unbelievable. Lucian finally looked at him then, calm as winter. No, he said softly. What is unbelievable is how easily your family mistook Adrian's kindness for weakness. Nobody spoke after that. They did not have anything left to say. Lucian turned toward me fully instead, completely ignoring the cameras still pointed at us. Do you want to leave? He asked quietly. Such a simple question. But nobody in my family had asked what I wanted in weeks. Maybe ever. Emotion tightened unexpectedly in my throat. Yes, I admitted softly. Lucien nodded once. Then, without another glance toward the ballroom, he guided me gently toward the exit while reporters scrambled out of our path. Outside, Chicago glowed silver and gold beneath the evening rain. The city looked softer after storms. Cleaner somehow. A black car waited at the curb with headlights reflecting across wet pavement while Lucien held the umbrella over both of us despite the rain mostly blowing sideways anyway. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The quiet between us no longer felt awkward, just full. You really embarrassed several millionaires tonight, I murmured finally. Lucien opened the passenger door for me with the faintest trace of amusement. One should always have hobbies. I laughed before I could stop myself. The sound startled both of us slightly. God, I had almost forgotten what laughing felt like when it was not defensive. Once inside the car, warmth wrapped around us immediately while rain streaked softly against the tinted windows. Lucien loosened his tie slightly, looking more tired now that nobody else was watching him. More human. I glanced down, then noticed a familiar black folder resting beside him on the leather seat. What is that? Lucien looked almost sheepish for the first time since meeting him. Technically, he said carefully, it is the original agreement I drafted for our arrangement. I blinked. You actually made a contract? I am unfortunately a very organized person. I laughed quietly again. That is deeply concerning. I know. He handed me the folder anyway. Inside sat several neatly typed pages outlining boundaries, media protection clauses, privacy agreements, and a 6-week fake relationship timeline. Near the bottom was Lucien's signature already written in elegant dark ink. My chest tightened strangely. Reading it now, 6 weeks suddenly felt painfully temporary. Well, I said softly, this feels weird now. Lucien watched me carefully. Why? I looked up slowly. Because somewhere between public humiliation and emotional collapse, I think we stopped pretending. Silence settled warmly between us. Lucien's expression softened in that rare, quiet way that always felt honest. Adrian, he murmured, I stopped pretending the night you stood in the rain yelling at me for being emotionally repressed. Heat rushed into my face immediately. That was one time. It was memorable. I shook my head laughing softly before looking back down at the contract. Then, carefully, I tore the pages in half. Lucien stared at me in surprise while paper fluttered lightly into my lap. There, I whispered. No more fake relationship. For one long second, he just looked at me. Really looked at me. Like I was something fragile and miraculous at the same time. Then Lucien reached over slowly, brushing damp hair gently away from my forehead with fingertips so careful it made my chest ache. Good, he said quietly. Because I would rather have something real with you than something perfect with anyone else. Outside, the rain finally began to stop as the car pulled smoothly into the glowing Chicago night. And for the first time in a very long time, going forward no longer felt frightening.